This is J. Krishnamurti's 10th public talk in Saanen, 1962.
This is the last talk. It seems to me that there are such great changes taking place outwardly in the world. I think most of us are aware of these extraordinary physical changes. And very few of us do change inwardly, deeply. We follow a certain pattern outwardly, and also inwardly we create our own conceptual, ideational frame within which we function. And apparently, for most of us, it is extraordinarily difficult to break through this ideational pattern. We live from concept to concept, from idea to idea. And we think that this movement from idea to idea is a change. But if we observe rather deeply, it is no change at all. Because thought, as we have gone into it fairly thoroughly during the last 9 gatherings, thought does not bring deep changes. It can superficially bring about a certain adjustments, conformity to a new pattern. But deeply, there is no change. We are what we have been, and probably we will be what is to be. So, inwardly, there is very little change. And this outward change is a movement, always corresponding to the inward instability, inward uncertainty, inward sense of fear, and the urge to escape from the dark, unexplored corners of our own mind. As I said, this is the last talk, and if I may, I would most earnestly request those who are taking notes not to take them, because this is not a gathering where you are gathering a lot of ideas. We are not dealing with ideas, on the contrary. We are breaking down ideas. We are shattering the pattern which the petty little mind has set for itself in its security. So, if I may most respectfully suggest, don't take notes. But actually experience or live that which is being said. And that means to listen. To listen easily, pleasantly, gracefully, without effort to what is being said. Not that you must agree, we have been through all that exposition and explanation, which are all quite immaterial. But I would like this morning to go into something which I feel is very important, which is first to realize the outward movement and the inward movement are the same. Not to divide the outer and the inner. Not to say the outward world and the inward world. It's like a tide that goes out and comes in. The tide can go very far out. And that same tide can come in very, very, very deeply. But if we divide life as the outer and the inner, the spiritual and the non-spiritual, the material and the non-material, and all the conflicts and divisions and contradictions arise. But if we actually experience this movement as the outer as well as the inner, then there is no conflict. Then the inward movement is not a reaction from the outer. It is not an escape from the world. It is not a withdrawal into a monastery, into an isolated tower. It's a movement. Both the outer, the external, and the inward. And when one has understood the significance of the outer, then the inward movement is not the opposite of the outer. It is something that is without reaction and therefore can proceed more deeply and immensely. And I think that's the first thing to understand. Not to divide the outer and the inner. And there is a great deal of beauty in this non-divisible, unitary process. And it is a unitary process. But to go into this unitary process more deeply, more extensively, one must understand this nature of humility. You know, most of us actually, if I may point out, do not know what it is to be humble. To have that sense of complete humility. Humility is not a virtue to be cultivated. The moment you cultivate humility, there is no humility. You are or you are not. And to have this humility, you must understand this outer and the inward movement as a unitary process. And having deeply gathered, understood this extraordinary meaning of this life as a whole, the life which is sorrow, which is pleasure, which is pain, which is seeking everlastingly some resting place and searching out something which it calls God or gives it another name. To understand all this, not reject it, not accept it, but to understand it. I mean by that word, understand, to be in a state of choiceless awareness. To be aware, to listen to your wife, to your husband, choicelessly. To listen to the wind among the trees, to listen to that water flowing, rushing by, to see the mountains, to be aware negatively. And then you will see out of this negative awareness, when there is an understanding of the outer and not treated as separate, as something unspiritual, not worthy, but as a movement, as a total unitary movement, then out of that comes a great sense of humility. Because a mind that has no humility can never learn. It can accumulate knowledge. It can gather more and more information. Both knowledge and information are superficial. And I do not know quite why there is such pride, such arrogance in knowing, in acquiring knowledge. It's all in the encyclopedia, and it is silly to accumulate knowledge which is used for personal pride and arrogance. And when there is humility, which is not a thing to be achieved, but you will come to it naturally, easily, gracefully, when this movement of the outer and the inner is understood as a one solid, total process. Then you begin to learn. I mean by that word learning, a state of mind which never accumulates, however pleasant the experience. A state of mind which never avoids a sorrow, a pain. And therefore it's always in a state of learning. And such a mind has humility. And you will say, out of this humility comes discipline. Because most of us are not disciplined. We conform, we adjust, we imitate, we suppress or sublimate. But such process is not discipline. Control is not discipline. It is merely the urge of fear to conform. And therefore discipline destroys and makes the mind narrow, stupid, dull. But I'm talking of a discipline that comes into being when there is this extraordinary sense of humility in which there is learning. And this learning is discipline in itself. You don't have to impose discipline. I hope I am making this very clear, because the so-called discipline of the soldier, the discipline that technique, officers, labor demands, is efficiency. Efficiency to kill and be killed. Efficiency to function in a shop as a bus driver or as a mechanic. All that demands efficiency. And in order to achieve efficiency, one disciplines oneself, which is to conform to the pattern which will produce an efficient entity who will function in a particular job completely. I am not talking of this mechanical discipline. We are talking of a discipline which is entirely different. And that discipline comes up by itself when one understands this extraordinary process of life as a whole, man as a whole, not in fragments, in fragmentation. When we understand ourselves as a total entity, not departmentalized, not as a musician, as an artist, as a speaker, as a yogi and all the rest of it, but as a complete human being. Then out of this understanding there is a learning. And that very act of learning is discipline, in which there is no conformity, no adjustment. And therefore the mind, not being disciplined to fit itself to a particular pattern, is free. And in this freedom there is an extraordinary sense of discipline. And I think it is important to understand this, because for most of us, freedom implies to do what one desires or what one instincts or what one calls, unfortunately, intuition. But that's not freedom. Freedom implies total emptying of the mind of the known. I do not know if you ever tried for yourself to free the mind from the known, or rather for the mind to free itself from the known. One cannot free the mind cannot free itself from technological knowledge. You must have it. It cannot free itself from the knowledge of where you live. But it can free itself from the accumulated tradition experience, the various conscious, unconscious urges, compulsions, which are all the reactions of the known. To deny, to put aside, to die to the known. If you have ever tried it, then you will see what that extraordinary thing called freedom is. Because unless there is freedom, a complete freedom, a total inward freedom, in which there is no dependency. For dependency, like attachment, implies a sense of inward loneliness, inward vacuity, which demands an outward acceptance of a relationship upon which it depends. I do not mean that kind of attachment. A free mind is not attached, though it may have relationship. But that freedom cannot come into being if there is no learning. If there is not that deep inward discipline, not based on any pattern, on any conceptual ideation, but when the mind is constantly freeing its dying to the known, then out of that comes a discipline, an austerity. Now, for most of us, austerity, which is really a marvelous thing, not a dry, wretched discipline of destructive denial, but an austerity out of a fullness, out of comprehension. I do not know if you have not ever felt that extraordinary sense of being completely austere, which has nothing whatsoever to do with discipline, control, adjustment. But you cannot understand this austerity, and there must be austerity. Because in that austerity there is great beauty and intense love. It is that austerity that is passionate. And that austerity comes when there is an aloneness. Now we must be, I think, rather aware and see the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Most of us if we are at all aware, most of us are lonely. You may be in a crowd, or with your family, at a party, or walking by yourself by a river, and you suddenly have this extraordinary sense of isolation, suddenly being cut off from everything, having no relationship with anything. And that isolation is essentially a state of fear. And from that fear we do all kinds of things. Turn on the radio, chase, drink, do all kinds of things to escape, including the pursuit of God and all the rest of it. And out of that loneliness, every action and reaction takes place. That loneliness is entirely different from aloneness. Loneliness is the result of being aware of all the influences and oneself being so malleable, so being a piece of mud which can be shaped into any state. But this aloneness is not the result of any influence. It is complete freedom from all influence. the influence of your wife, the husband, of the state, of what you read, of the church, of the tradition, of your unconscious demands. Being completely free of all that. And in that freedom there is an aloneness. Which is again that aloneness which is complete freedom from the known. And when there is this sense of learning, which comes when we understand the total process of life, and that learning demands discipline. Not the discipline of the church, of the army, of the scholar, of the athlete, of the man who is pursuing particular knowledge or specialist. But that discipline which comes out of deep sense of humility. And there cannot be humility if there is no aloneness. So far, up to that point, we can either verbally, intellectually follow, because what has been said is reasonable, logical, sane, healthy. Up to that point, if one is aware of the meaning of words, not only semantically, but also go behind the words, one can feel our way into it. But something else is demanded. Something much more is required. That is like laying a foundation to a house. That's only a foundation and nothing more. But that foundation must be laid. And that foundation must be laid with passion, with intensity, with beauty, and therefore with love. Not out of despair, not out of conflict, not out of some desire to achieve a stupid result. Which means really, the mind is now in a state when there is freedom from the known. I do not know if you have ever been aware how you gather, how every little experience, how every little information the mind holds. The mind is a soil in which every root, every passing thought takes its root and shapes the mind. Every experience shapes, gives a mold forms a mold in which the mind can fit. And therefore every experience, however real, however deep, however traditional, however ancient, only limits the mind. And when the mind has understood its limitation from this process, and easily, without any conflict, frees itself from the known, then out of this freedom, out of this laying the foundation, then there is a movement which is creation. We're all seeking God. I will use that word because that word to the speaker has no meaning whatsoever. But we will use that word as most of you understand it. For us, God is merely a belief. You have been trained in that word. And that word spelled the other way as dog might be as good as your word God. But we have been trained in it from childhood to accept it. The church, with its 2,000 or 10,000 years of propaganda, has conditioned the mind to believe. And we accept it so easily, as the other part of the world accepts that there is no God, the communist world, because they have been brought up in it. That's another propaganda. The believer and the non-believer are the same, because they are slaves to propaganda. And being slave to propaganda, the word God is not God at all. It is their concept, their idea. Now, to find out if there is or if there is not, you must destroy everything which is of propaganda. Because religion now is put together by man. Built centuries upon centuries, brick by brick, by man, in his fear, in his greed, in his ambition, in his despair and hope. It has been put together. Put together from the ancient of times. And a man who would find, if there is or if there is not, must totally destroy that. Without a motive. Completely erase from his mind every instinct. Must completely cease search. And it's only when the mind is completely empty of the known, empty of the Savior, empty of all the gods that have been manufactured, built, carved out of thought. It's only then, when the mind is free from the known, and therefore in a state of complete quietness, not induced by breathing, by exercise, by tricks, by drugs of the latest kind, but completely quiet, which can only come into being when there is freedom from the known. Only then, if one has gone that far, and one must go that far. Really, it is not far. there is no distance. But to abolish distance, time must cease. And that time ceases only when there is the knowing of oneself as one is, from fact to fact. Then you will say that in this extraordinary sense of freedom, there is a movement. A movement which is immeasurable, which is beyond all concept. And it is this movement that is creation, which is both love, death, and when the mind has come to that, then it will see for itself that love, death, and creation are the same. And a mind that merely holds to the word, to the image, to the symbol, to an idea, cannot ever go that far. One must be free of the word. And that is the beginning and the ending of all thought. Really, sir?
This freedom, isn't it like the air?
Like the
The air around us. And have we not built a sort of vacuum? And if we can pierce that, the form of vacuum,
Yes, sir.
doesn't it come down?
The gentleman asks, is not freedom like the air? And have we not built for ourselves a tent like this to prevent that air from coming in? And if we could only pierce the tent, then the air will come pouring in. You know, similes, wait for the train. Theories, a verbal picture is most dangerous. It's merely a theory. Because moment you say if, then you are thinking conditionally. You're not actually in that state. We are not talking theoretically. We are not imagining, theorizing. We are moving, as we explained, from the very beginning of this talk, from psychological facts. And if you avoid those psychological facts and do not face those psychological facts, then the tent, the air, the soul, and all these theories come tumbling in and you are destroyed. So, what is the good of telling a man who is desperately hungry What's the good of telling him or describing to him the lovely dishes and the various savor and all the rest of it? He wants food. And most theories are merely descriptions to a man who is hungry. And unfortunately, most of us are not hungry. I mean psychologically hungry. Most of us have had our breakfast. And probably we'll have our lunch and dinner today, tomorrow. But most of us are well fed psychologically because we have our experiences. We have found shelters in belief, in dogma. We have securities. We belong to this group or that group, to this church or that church. And when we are discontent, which is a very rare thing, then if we are discontent, we promptly destroy that by seeking something which will give us immediate satisfaction. But to remain tremendously psychologically hungry, without going insane, without becoming neurotic, to remain in that state of hunger, not how to feed that hunger. The moment you try to feed that hunger, you're lost. You can feed it very easily by your words, by your theories, by books, churches, anything. But to remain in that state of deep hunger, which is like a burning flame, so that you will all the time destroy, so as to, out of this destruction there are ashes, complete ashes, of not despair. And then out of that emptiness something real can take place. Make it brief, sir.
Do we come to the problem of change with an attitude, a state of inquiry? An inquiry that is not even articulate, a state of mute inquiry. Is that the approach to change?
Please make your questions brief, because I have to repeat these questions. And if I repeat these questions wrongly, please correct. The gentleman asked, most of our changes have a motive. The change of which you are speaking is it instinctual? Is it has it no purpose? Is it merely the outcome of understanding? Is that it?
I beg your pardon.
What's up?
I'm not trying to interpret what you have said. I am merely trying to find out, for the beginner, for a man with no pretension, what should be his state of mind before the problem of change. Does he come to it with a purpose? Does he come to it saying, I'm going to
The gentleman asks, if I may interpret him, how is this change brought about? Is it brought about through volition, through a motive? Those are the only two things. By determination, by will, or through some form of subtle, unconscious motive. Now, what is will? Don't please theorize. Don't compare what somebody has said. Let's find out what it means, will. To do something. You want to do something. Will. Is it not desire? Many desires put together. Many urges. Many resistances. Many demands. Gives one this extraordinary sense of volition, wanting to do something and going through with it. It is the result of desire, it's the result of resistance, it's the result of many experiences put together, brought together into a sharpened instrument. And we know through that will we can change. If I say I will not be angry tomorrow, if I exercise my will very strongly, I'll prevent myself from being angry tomorrow. But that is not change. That's merely, as I pointed out earlier, conforming to a desired pattern. To me, any change brought about through will is no change at all. It's merely a continuity of what has been in a different pattern, in a different framework. If I change through motive, because my mother likes it, because society wants me to do it, because there is some profit in it, and so on, so on, so on, it's no change at all. Because again, that change is the result of persuasion, influence, reward, punishment, and so on. Now, if I understand both the whole process of motive and the extraordinary subtlety of will, if I understand it, and we have very carefully explained what that word means, to understand. I'm not going to go into it now. If I understand, if there is an understanding of the change through motive, through will, then when there is an understanding of these two processes, and therefore putting these two processes aside, when these two processes die, then out of that understanding comes a change, which is not premeditated, which is not brought about through influence, through various forms of urges and compulsion. There is a change which is really an extraordinary destruction of everything known.
Do it without wanting to do it. It's a bit of a freak. If I want to
No, I do not know what let me explain. Sorry. Let me repeat your question. The gentleman says, this form of change that you are explaining is a trick. He is using the word not derogatorily, but with understanding. Now, sir, you mentioned the word ambition. Most of us are ambitious. And we know the meaning, not only a verbal meaning, but the implication of that word, what is behind it. The competition, the ruthlessness, the lack of love, and all the rest of it. Now, how is one to be entirely free of ambition? To change, you follow? Now, how is one to bring that about? Just listen to me quietly. You may not agree or disagree, but just listen. I am ambitious. If I am, I'm ambitious. And I've listened, I have read, and I've thought about it, and I say how stupid it is to be ambitious. Ambitious for God, position, power, wanting to be somebody and all that. Then how am I to change? Change completely, not just change in one or two directions. Most of our education from childhood is geared, is built around this idea of success, of being somebody, becoming somebody, achieving. And we never have learned for ourselves to love what we are doing, to love. I mean by that word, love what we are doing without motive, without success. You know, when you love somebody, you don't think what you are getting out of that somebody. You don't love because that person gives you money, position, or you love. If such a love exists. Now, if I love what I am doing, then there is no ambition. Then I am not comparing. Then I am not saying somebody is doing better than I am. I have put in that love what I'm, my whole heart, my whole being into it. But we are not trained that way. We are not asked to do that. Society demands so many sculptors, so many scientists, so many engineers, technicians and so on. And we are shoved through the gate of what we call college, and we have to fit into that pattern. But to love what you are doing implies the denial of ambition. Not through will, not through motive, not through a purpose. It happens when you love. Have I explained your question, sir? Right. Lady wants to know how to prevent conditioning children. Will you wait a minute before I answer it? Because you also must be, your mind must be spinning at top level. Therefore I must have rest. How can children not be conditioned? Really, it's quite a complex question. I'll try to make it as clear and as simple as possible. First of all, the parent, the educator, has to be aware of his own conditioning. Obviously. Then, how is one to prevent this conditioning of the child? Society insists on conditioning the child. Society, I mean by government, religion, morality, the whole psychological structure which we call society is constantly impinging on the mind of a child, on the mind of all of us. We are that mind. And you can't, modern society, what it is, you can't keep your child away from school. The school is not interested in unconditioning the mind. On the contrary, it wants it to be conditioned. So, the parent at home has a battle on, a war on between the desire to uncondition the mind of the child and society wanting to condition it. You understand? The church wants to condition the child. The Protestants, the Catholics, the Hindus, and all the rest of the organized propagandistic religions. And what are you to do? And the child wants to conform, because it's much more fun to be like the rest of the crowd rather than be something different. You know all this. All join the Boy Scouts, all become something else. So, what one can do is at home to point out, to discuss, to argue, to explain all the time to the child, not to conform, not to accept, to question, to break through everything that society demands, and not become a mere delinquent child. That's very easy to revolt within the pattern, which is delinquency. But to understand these innumerable influences and to explain to the child when he reads a comic, when he listens to the radio, not to let it destroy his mind. That demands your awareness, that demands that you yourself are working at your own breaking down of your conditioning. Then you can help the child.
Obviously, without these changes, nothing really worthwhile will be achieved. We are in a prehistoric period, but when these changes are brought about, does the new man, better man, will have to face entirely new problems unknown to us now in his march upwards, or is it an end of everything?
I must take a rest. I'm going to answer your questions. You say, unfortunately, I am working, and you are listening. If you are also working intensely, furiously as I am doing, with delight, then obviously your brain will be rather weary. But apparently, you're also eager to ask questions. So I must hesitate before I answer. Has everyone not heard the question? I'm afraid I have to repeat it. Is what you are talking about the end or the beginning of a new man? If it is the beginning of a new man, will he go forward? Will his problems be entirely different? I don't know what we mean by forward, making progress. I think you can make progress only in the material world. There is the wheel and the jet. The extremes, the bullock cart and the extraordinary thing called the jet plane. And the rockets that go to the moon and all the rest of it. But is there progress in any other direction, inwardly? Please just listen. We'll just wait till this. Is there progress? That means the idea of time idea that I shall become something psychologically. And you see, sir, to me, the idea of becoming, progressing, moving involves problem. Problem. A mind that is free, a mind that has understood deeply the question of time has never any problem anymore. So there are problems, it will meet it as it arises. But in itself it does not project or create problems for itself. But most of us are ridden with problems, burdened with problems. I think we are approaching the question wrongly. You see, when the mind is free from the known, it's a new mind. It's an innocent mind. And how can that move forward or backward or have a problem? It is in a state of creation. I don't mean creation, pictures, painting, all that business, but you see, that's why that which is immeasurable, the nameless, is beyond time. And how can we ask that whether it has problems, whether it will move forward, backward, what is its future? What we have been discussing for the last 10 meetings is to come naturally, easily and gracefully into that state. Not invite it, because you can't invite. A petty little mind can't invite the immense. All this pettiness has come to an end, then the other is. It can't imagine what the other is. It can only project from its pettiness, from its shallowness, from its ugliness, something beautiful. But that which is beautiful is still ugly. So what we have been saying is, when all this psychological structure, which is society, which is each one of us is that society, when that is understood, when there is freedom from that, then there is that which is nameless, in which there is no time, no progress. It is. How can a conditioned mind understand truths which might be significant? How can a conditioned mind understand what is true? It cannot. Sir, look, sir, make it very simple. Suppose I am nationalistic. I am an Indian, I am nationalistic. I am bound to my country, to my sovereign, to my petty little nationalism. How can such a mind understand a state which is completely beyond all this? It can't. So what it has to do is to understand its own nationalism, break it down, destroy it, completely put it aside. And that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. Nationalism is merely an expansion of our petty little selves. I identify myself with the country because I'm small and the country is great. The idea of nationalism is bigger. And I, a tribal entity, identify myself with something greater. And that's what we are all doing. I may not identify myself with my country. I want to identify myself and commit myself for a supreme action. Or I want to commit and identify myself with God, with an idea. Nationalism or identification and commitment to an idea as God are same. Whether you commit yourself to your family or to God or become a monk, is exactly the same. It's still conditioned. And to break down this condition requires, as we have gone into it, a choiceless awareness, watching every movement of thought, playing, watching, just watching. Isn't that enough for today? Pleasant journey.